Ben Shapiro tears into a college student who frankly just doesn't know what he's talking about. Guys, this is going to be a fun video. You're going to like it. It's covering the topic of income inequality in the United States, which is a very nuanced and interesting issue. So we're going to get right into it, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. But first, I need you guys to do me a big favor. Yes, you already know where I'm going with this, don't you? Please like our video, share it around, and if you are new, subscribe to the Resist the Mainstream YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you guys this great, hard-hitting content. And for those of you who have subscribed, thank you so much for coming back. We really appreciate it. As always, everybody, I'm your host, Darian. Let's get into the show.
Hi, thank you so much, Ben, for coming to Cornell. My question revolves around wealth redistribution. You often argue against wealth redistribution and higher taxes on the wealthy. However, in the past 50 years, the wealth gap between the working class and the upper class has been growing by almost 10%, with single women, Africans, and Latinos being lower on the economic ladder, oftentimes, which you have said, are the people playing the victimization card. With these inequalities continue to grow, how can you not argue for some sort of wealth redistribution or taxes on the wealthy?
Okay, so there's a few points you made here. One is that when you talk about the gap between the rich and the poor, these are not stable groups of people. Okay, people go from the bottom quintile to the top quintile and back down to the second quintile and back up and back down. Okay, I in my life have been in probably the second to bottom quintile when I was growing up, and now I'm in the top quintile. Right, that's fairly common. This happens actually over the course of life for many people who just age in the United States. As you get older, you start to build wealth. Hopefully you get a job, and then you grow out of that. And the reality is that if you want to escape permanent poverty in the United States, you really only need to do three things. As I've discussed before, this is not my research. This is research from writers for The Atlantic, the Thurnstroms back in the 1980s, but it's been very well verified. You don't want to be in permanent poverty in the United States. Finish high school, get a job, don't have babies until you're married. Those three things, you won't be in permanent poverty in the United States. There is income mobility in the United States. That's number one. So when we say gap between the rich and the poor, you have to understand these are not stable groups of people. People are moving up and down between various wealth brackets.
All obviously correct points. You know, I myself have plenty of family who've immigrated from other parts of the world, and some of them, many of them in fact, came here with absolutely nothing and managed to make a good life for themselves. In other words, they lived the American dream. And for that, I, and I'm sure they as well, are forever grateful. As far as that kid's earlier point where he mentioned, you know, it's a little misleading. He mentioned single women. This is something that wasn't called out by Shapiro and said that they have lower economic earnings. It's actually not true. It really isn't. I'll give you an example here. Time, right? Very left-leaning source, obviously. Time Magazine, you know all about it. They did a study on women versus men in wages in the workforce. And what they found was that in 147 out of 150 of the most major cities in the United States, if you put in the controls for type of job, type of degree, job experience, et cetera, women actually out-earn men by 8%. And that's significant, by the way. 8% is not nothing. That's almost 10%. It's only 2% off. And 10% of an income, that's the difference between, you know, 60,000 and 66,000, for instance. That is very substantial, and it's not something to sneeze at. But of course, we don't see anybody talking about, oh, you know, the gender pay gap for men. There's never going to be any gripings or complaints about that because, as we all know, straight white males just rule the world and have everything handed to them, and they sit in their ivory towers and laugh at everything about how easy it all is. That's obviously a joke.
Point number two, the only way to solve the disparity in wealth, which sometimes is historic, meaning like your grandma had a house and now she passed it on to you. I will point out here, the vast majority of people who are very wealthy in the United States are not wealthy because grandma had wealth. Right? Elon Musk actually, contrary to popular opinion, did not grow up wealthy. Right? I did not grow up wealthy. In fact, most of the people that I know who are very, very wealthy did not grow up wealthy. There's tremendous income mobility. The way that you solve for wealth gaps in the United States is with better income mobility, and that only comes with an opportunity economy that allows people to move forward based on their efforts, right? Based on innovation, based on keeping the wealth that they generate in and of themselves. If you take that away from them, then it removes the incentive and it also perverts the incentive structure. So there's that as well. And then finally, the biggest question of all is everyone, who talks about wealth redistribution, they like to talk about the wealth gap. Okay, I don't care about the wealth gap. I honestly don't. All I care about is the people at the bottom and are they getting better? I don't care if the person at the top is earning 100 times more than the person at the bottom. I just care whether the person at the bottom has a better life than they did 20 years ago. And it is bewildering to me that people are so concerned about what the guy next door is doing. Right? That just seems to me Cain and Abel jealousy. I've never thought to myself, man, my life is way better than it was when I was a kid, which it is, economically speaking. But you know who's way richer than I am? Elon Musk. And that's not fair. Right? That's a silly way to think about life. The question is whether all ships are rising.
I have a biblical commandment to read everybody real quick. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. Everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Just thought I'd read that. You know, the Bible is full of a lot of great lessons that a lot of people like to ignore and pretend aren't there, but they are. So, great point by Shapiro, and great point, Jesus Christ, we love you.
And for all of the talk about the middle class having stagnated in the United States, that is manifestly untrue. It is simply not true. And you can look in your pocket right now and you know it's not true. Okay, the device that you have in your pocket is a magical device that no one on earth had 50 years ago. It did not exist. And then only the rich people had back in the 1980s when Gordon Gekko was carrying around a shoebox on his head in Wall Street. And now we all have in our pocket more computing power than all of NASA had when we sent a man to the moon, right? That is because everybody has gotten wealthier through innovation. Things, they start off as a luxury item and then they become a common everyday necessity, right? Who would have called a cell phone in 1981 a necessity? But today you'd call a cell phone a necessity. We would all call a cell phone a necessity. And everyone in the United States who is deemed poor basically has a cell phone.
You know, this is where I think Ben Shapiro actually really misses the mark, and pretty badly so. I just have to say. We are not doing better. The middle class is not doing better than ever. That's kind of a ridiculous assertion. Has that been true for, on the aggregate, in the past, like, I don't know, 100 years or so? Sure, maybe you can make that argument for that. More luxury goods, whatever. Yeah, I get it. But I don't think having a tracking device that, as Shapiro admitted himself, is now a necessity that you basically have to pay an annual tax to own. I don't think that makes us more wealthy or better off as a nation. I really don't. Look at smartphones and social media and how damaging that's been to the American people, especially our youth, right? I mean, it's already screwed up adults in a lot of ways that we don't need to get into right now, but even our youth are suffering because of that. So I don't know, is it because we can get a $100 TV from China or, you know, $500 iPhone or whatever? Is that supposed to mean we're wealthier and better off? I don't really buy that. And as Charlie Kirk has famously pointed out time and time again, my generation, Generation Z, is the first generation in recent American history that is going to be worse off than their parents economically. So really, are we going to sit here and argue that the middle class is doing better than ever and that they're rising up? Yeah, I don't believe that. Now, look, I'm not here for being jealous or coveting that neighbor's wife and that kind of thing. Of course I'm not. But income inequality in this sense actually is a problem, because if you just look at the COVID-19 pandemic and outbreak and the reaction to that, for example, we had plenty of companies, pharmaceuticals especially, primarily among them, who got way wealthier. About, I don't know, something like, I think 6 new billionaires, maybe 9 or more, were created during that thing. Meanwhile, the middle class got totally gutted. 1 out of 3 in small businesses in America are gone forever. Or is it 1 out of 4? It might be 1 out of 4. It's a tragedy. It's terrible. And the middle class is suffering. So totally disagree on Ben Shapiro's point here. I just think he's completely wrong. There's no other way to say it.
That is because everybody has gotten a lot better. Final point on this. When you look at the wealth redistribution in the United States, the truth is the United States has an extraordinary amount of wealth redistribution. Very often when people talk about the income gap or the wealth gap in the United States, they're ignoring the benefits that are actually paid out from the top quintile on down. If you look at net benefits in the United States, if you look at net taxes in the United States are not paid partially by the top quintile. They're paid entirely by the top quintile. Everybody who's below the top quintile is receiving more back in taxpayer subsidies and taxpayer dollars than they are paying in. So the United States has one of the most progressive income tax systems on the planet. In fact, if you actually wanted to have a more socialistic style welfare system in the United States, what you'd have to do is tax people at the bottom. Right, the top tax bracket kicks in places like Denmark and Norway at $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, not at $300,000, $400,000 a year.
That last part by Shapiro is totally true, and thank God we don't have those commie-style taxes on Denmark. Guys, please be sure to comment below. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys again soon, and God bless.